I'm going to show you how I made this overhead camera mount with LED lighting. It was super cheap and very easy to make, and I'll be going over all of the steps, so feel free if you want to follow along. Having the camera mounted above you when you're trying to film and work on things is a much more convenient setup. So, welcome to the channel. This only took me a couple hours and a trip to the hardware store, and even though it was very easy, it unfortunately is not going to build itself, so let's go. This project was inspired by the Great Scott video where he made his own overhead camera mount, and his is quite a bit fancier with some 3D printed parts and a monitor mount. So if you've never seen his videos, I'm going to leave a link to that video in the description below. Here are all the parts you're going to need to build the structure part of the overhead mount. All of this is made from PVC except for the two 44-inch planks of wood. So you're going to need 4 90-degree corners, 4 3-way corners, 2 40-inch tubes, and 8 24-inch tubes. I went with 3/4 inch diameter, but you could go larger if you wanted something more stable. Just know that it's going to weigh more. I purchased 3 10-foot pieces of PVC, and that was more than adequate for all of the lengths that I needed. I only had a little bit left over after that. Before, you saw me measuring all the lengths that I needed, and here I am just cutting them ASMR style. Now that I've cut all my pieces to the correct length, I'm going to be gluing all of the pieces together, and to do that I'm going to be using this PVC glue. Now you could probably get away with not using PVC specific glue, and you might even be able to get away with not gluing them at all, but I'm going to be putting sand in these later, so I do not want them to come apart and have sand go everywhere in a place I don't want it to be. You just saw me cleaning the ends of all the pieces and also the insides of all the corners, and that's not a requirement, but it is a recommendation because you're going to get a much stronger bond using the glue when the parts are cleaner. I'm not building the entire structure right now, I'm just building some pieces of it because I'm going to be filling it with sand. This part is also not required, but it is recommended because the sand is going to help stabilize the structure. You might also want to opt to not put the sand in if you're going to be transporting this or moving it around a lot, because the sand definitely does make it a lot heavier. I definitely overdid it on the sand filling because I filled up basically the entire structure, but I think the actual optimum amount is going to be maybe half or a third of just the bottom of the structure. I'm going to keep moving on with assembly until I have the full completed PVC structure. It does look a little skewed in this frame, I'll admit, but the grass is definitely not flat, and here you can see it is much better. I might have tweaked it a little bit more with hammering on some of the corners, but you're never going to get it millimeter perfect, and that's okay. Here's just a piece of scrap wood that I'm going to be using to mount the camera mount to, and you can use any piece of wood. It doesn't have to be dimensionally the same as this, it just has to hold up the camera and span the distance of the structure. You should be able to find something for free or next to nothing, a piece of a pallet or something like that. And I picked a very pleasant day to be working outside all day. It was pretty miserable. If I can do this in 100-degree weather with no AC outside for most of it, there's no excuses for you guys. You should be able to do this. Here I am just marking the holes to be drilled so that I can mount this to the PVC structure. I had to take a break and film this guy because I thought he just looked really cool. And, you know, with all this gene splicing and gene editing, Elon said something or made a tweet or something about how in the future we're going to be able to literally be a butterfly genetically if we wanted to be, which I think is totally crazy. But I mean, I don't know if I want to be a butterfly, but I think having the option to be if you wanted to is pretty cool. So that's going to be interesting. And here's some more cutting the wood pieces down, some ASMR for you guys. To mount the camera, I'm going to be using this quick release ball mount by setting it at 90 degrees. You definitely don't need something this fancy or expensive, but it will make it more convenient when you're attaching and detaching the camera, and also for adjustability. For a cheaper alternative, you can just get a small piece of wood and mount that 90 degrees to this piece of wood and then mount your camera to that. Mounting the wood couldn't be easier. It's just threading some zip ties through these holes, and no, I don't have OCD, so I didn't waste that zip tie right there. I did actually. Which I'll admit is a bit silly when you consider the context in which this project appears aesthetically, but that's fine, I'm okay with it. And here's the camera mounted to the ball mount, which is mounted to the plank of wood, which is zip tied to the frame. And in a moment, I'm going to be showing you through the view of that camera, which, very unsurprising, is going to be an overhead shot, an overhead view, which is the whole point of making this overhead camera mount. And this works out very well because you don't have a camera in your way, you don't have a tripod, you don't have lights in your way. You just have a very clear picture, a very good overhead view of what you're working on, and you have great lighting to go along with it. I added these foam runners on the bottom of the frame, not to protect anything, but because I wanted to raise the overall height of the camera from the table about an inch or two. I found that raising this up a little bit gave me the optimum space for this particular lens and zoom. Now the only thing left to do is to add the lighting. And of course, some zip tie cleanup. Now we're getting into the electronics part of the build. This is just a standard LED dimmer, and it was very cheap, but also very robust. And it should be more than adequate for this application. These particular LED strips are a little bit different than the standard 50/50 ones, but they are insanely bright. I opted for the non-waterproof because you save a little bit of money. If you're going to be putting this outside or environments where it's going to be prone to more moisture, liquid, or rain or whatever, I would probably opt for the waterproof ones. I was trying my best to lay these LED strips down very symmetrically, but I realized that, hey, there's a hole right there where the ball mount goes, so you have to go around that. You know, I have to admit that the partial reason why this looks so kind of shoddy and sloppily put together is not so much of laziness, but more because the purpose I was going to have for this overhead camera mount was originally designed to be very temporary, where I could just kind of put it up and throw the camera on and do some shots and then take it off the desk and kind of put it off to the side. After using this overhead mount for less than a week, I quickly realized how often I was using it, and I was mainly using it as a light source. Because of that, I'm already making plans to make a much better looking and stronger and bigger version of this, so expect a video of that sometime in the future. I completely overdid it on the hot glue here, and I don't know what happened, but I have become a hot glue fanatic. I think when I was a kid, I used to think that hot glue was like this terrible adhesive that never worked, and maybe that's true from like 20 years ago, but the hot glue nowadays is literally incredible. I just want to hot glue everything all the time and overdo it just like I am here. Although I am using a lot of hot glue here because even though the LED strips do come with their own adhesive, this plank of wood in particular is very porous and rough, and I just figured with the lighting and the heat generated from the lights that at some point they're gonna sag and fall down, and I didn't want to deal with that, so I'm just completely overdoing it with the hot glue. Mounting the dimmer was very easy. And securing the rear plank of wood that helps to hold the LEDs up. I always keep my AC to DC adapters if a laptop dies or some component fails and they had an AC to DC adapter. I always keep it for projects such as this. As long as the voltage is correct, then you already have a power supply. You don't have to buy another one. You don't have to throw away something and create even more waste. I have a ton of these adapters in a box, and I'll be making a video on ways that you can implement them in your projects later. And as you can see, the LED dimmer works very well. There's no weirdness or flickering or anything like that. I then routed the power supply wires down the tubing and snaked it around the leg to where I fastened the power supply to the actual frame so that when I unplug and take it away, I don't have this big power supply kind of dangling around and pulling on all the wires. It's very simple to wire up. Just plug the positive and negative from the power supply into the controller, and then the positive and negative from the LEDs also into the controller. And more of the dimming action. You can just wire a toggle switch if you don't want a dimmer, and that will work fine, but it's kind of nice to have a dimming function. Here's an overhead demo of the dimming and also some zooming in and out. You're not going to see as dramatic of a result from the dimmer, and that's because my ISO on my camera is set to auto, but if you turn that off, it's going to be much more dramatic. Here are some not so glamorous glamour shots. Definitely not the prettiest thing ever made, but what it lacks in aesthetics, it makes up for in functionality. And now some overtly cinematic B-roll of this monstrosity. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you were inspired to create your very own ugly overhead camera mount. Please feel free to improve upon this very quick and dirty design. I'm remaking this GPS and phone mount, so until then, I will see you in the next one.